My name is Cleo Asante. I am 28 years old and I was a senior account manager at a digital marketing agency in Atlanta for 3 years. The client call was on a Wednesday afternoon. 12 people on the video conference, 4 from our agency and 8 from Harlow Retail, including their VP of Marketing and their newly appointed Chief Brand Officer. The kind of call where you dress one step above your normal working standard and make sure your background is clean and your audio doesn't echo. I had been preparing for it for 2 weeks. 17 minutes into the call, my manager, Mr. Ferris, told the room that the campaign strategy they were looking at, the one that contradicted their original brief in 3 significant ways, had been built that way because of my misinterpretation of their requirements. He said it calmly, regretfully almost, the way a manager sounds when they're performing disappointment while actually performing their own innocence. 8 Harlow faces watched me through their cameras. I felt it land the way those things land, not in your chest but somewhere lower and quieter. The specific kind of impact that doesn't hurt immediately because your body doesn't believe it yet. I waited 4 seconds. Then I said, "I apologize for the confusion this has caused." Mr. Ferris's shoulders visibly settled. And then I said, "Would everyone mind if I shared my screen for a moment? I have the project documentation here and I think it will help clarify the timeline." Nobody said no. I shared my screen. And the next 11 minutes changed everything that followed. I had joined the agency 2.5 years earlier, hired specifically to manage Harlow Retail, the agency's largest account, and at the time, its most complicated relationship. The previous account manager had left after 18 months, the reasons for which were described to me in my first week as a values misalignment by HR and as Harlow is a nightmare by everyone else. Harlow was not a nightmare. They were demanding, specific, and had a brand identity they had spent a decade building. They knew what they wanted and they expected it to be delivered accurately. That's not a nightmare, that's a client who has been burned before. I spent my first 6 months learning the brand, not just the guidelines, the reasoning behind them. I read every piece of content they had published in the previous 3 years. I interviewed 3 members of their internal marketing team about what they wished agency partners understood that they consistently failed to. I built a reference document. I called the brand intelligence brief that I updated every quarter. By the end of my first year, the Harlow account had renewed at a higher retainer than the previous contract. Their VP of Marketing, a man named Mr. Okafor, had sent a note to our CEO describing the new account management approach as the most aligned we've felt with an agency partner in 6 years. That note lived in a folder on my drive. I had read it once and then put it away, because I was not the kind of person who kept trophies on her desk. I was, however, the kind of person who kept records. Mr. Ferris had joined the agency 8 months before the Wednesday call. He had been brought in as head of client services, a new role the agency had created to sit between the account team and senior leadership. The theory was that he would handle the commercial relationship with clients while the account managers focused on delivery. The practice was different. He was not a delivery person. He had come from a strategy consultancy where the work was conceptual and the client relationship was the product. He knew how to run a presentation and how to give a room confidence. He did not know how to build a campaign or manage the detail underneath one. Within 2 months of joining, he had inserted himself into client communications that had previously been mine. He attended calls I had been running without him for 18 months and began positioning himself as the primary contact. His emails to clients often summarized conversations that had taken place between me and the client without his involvement, written as though he had been present. I noticed it the way you notice a slow change in pressure, not in one moment but across many small ones until the cumulative shift becomes undeniable. By the time of the Wednesday call, he had been sitting across from Harlow's leadership for 6 months, presenting work he had reviewed but not built, making promises about timelines and capabilities he had not consulted me on, and casually describing strategic decisions as collaborative when they had been unilateral. The Wednesday call was not the beginning of anything. It was just the first time it happened in front of 8 people who had cameras pointed at their faces. The brief had arrived from Harlow 6 weeks earlier. It was 22 pages, specific, structured, and clear about 3 things above everything else the campaign needed to lead with the brand's sustainability, positioning, price messaging needed to be secondary rather than primary, and any influencer strategy had to be exclusively within the micro tier. No macro or celebrity partnerships, which Harlow had explicitly stated conflicted with their brand identity guidelines. I built the campaign strategy to those 3 parameters exactly. I submitted the first draft to Mr. Ferris on the 21st of the month, the Thursday afternoon, time-stamped in our project management platform at 4:47 p.m. The draft was 41 slides. Sustainability-led. Price as supporting narrative. Micro-influencer architecture only. Every structural decision traceable to a specific line of the brief. I had built it carefully. Not just to be accurate, but because the Harlow account had taught me that precision was the difference between a client who trusted you and a client who merely tolerated you. I knew their brand better than most people on their own team knew it. That knowledge had taken 2.5 years to build, and it was in every slide. Mr. Ferris reviewed it over the weekend and sent a message on Monday morning making some adjustments based on conversations I've had with Harlow leadership. We'll resend. He sent the revised version on Tuesday morning. I opened it in my car before I went into the office and sat very still for several minutes. The sustainability-led had been replaced with a price-led headline structure. A macro-influencer tier had been added, 3 celebrity partnerships at significant media investment. The brand messaging hierarchy had been inverted. All 3 of Harlow's explicit requirements reversed. I forwarded the original brief to my personal email before I walked into the building. I sent Mr. Ferris a message at 9:14 on the Tuesday morning. I was precise and I was not emotional. I listed the 3 specific points where the revised strategy contradicted Harlow's stated brief. I attached the relevant pages of the brief for reference. I said, I want to flag these before we take this to the client because I believe the current version will generate significant pushback. Happy to discuss before the Wednesday call. He responded at 11:43. Appreciate the flag. I've spoken with their CMO informally and I have a sense they're more flexible on these points than the brief suggests. Let's trust the relationship and see how the conversation develops on Wednesday. The their CMO, not Mr. Okafor, not the VP of marketing who had been my primary contact for 2 years. The CMO, a woman named Miss Calloway who had joined Harlow 3 months earlier and who I had met once briefly on an introductory call. I read his message 3 times. Then I saved it. I saved every message from that thread, every version of the document with its timestamps, every email from Harlow's brief team confirming the 3 requirements, my original draft, his revised version, the diff between them. I was not planning a confrontation. I was building an insurance policy. Because I had worked in client services long enough to know that when something goes wrong on a client call and a manager says, I'll find out who's responsible, the answer is very rarely themselves. I spent Tuesday evening at my kitchen table not working on the presentation. I had it ready. The deck was his version, the one I had flagged and he had overruled. I was not going to walk into that call with a different version he hadn't sanctioned. That wasn't the move. The move was something else, and I had been thinking about it since I opened his revision in my car. I needed one thing to be true before Wednesday's call would go the way. I was hoping the client would respond to the strategy the way any client responds when you hand them something that contradicts what they explicitly asked for. With questions, maybe frustration. And if Mr. Ferris handled that the way I suspected he would by finding an explanation that didn't involve the word I, then I needed to be ready. I organized my screen into what I thought of as the reading order. The brief excerpt, first the 3 requirements, their exact language. Behind it, my original draft submission. Behind that, his revision with the timestamp. Behind that, his Monday message telling me he'd made adjustments. Behind that, his Tuesday reply telling me to trust the relationship. 5 documents, a clear narrative, readable in under 3 minutes. I saved it to a folder on my desktop called Call Prep. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I closed my laptop at 9 o'clock and watched something on television and did not think about work for the rest of the evening. I had done everything I could. The rest was going to depend on what happened on the call. My colleague Premi found me in the break room Wednesday morning at 8:40. Premi was a senior creative strategist who had worked on the Harlow account for 18 months before I arrived. She knew the client, the brand, and the specific way things tended to go wrong between ambition and execution. She was sharp, blunt, and had told me more useful things about navigating this agency in a 5-minute coffee conversation than any amount of onboarding documentation. She poured her coffee and looked at me sideways. "Big call today," she said. It was not a question. Harlow campaign review. She was quiet for a moment. "I saw the revised deck," she said. I looked at her. The revised deck had been distributed to the core account team that morning. She had been on it long enough to have read it. "Price led," she said. "Celebrity tier." That's not what they asked for. "No," I said. She held her coffee with both hands and looked at the window. "What are you going to do if it goes sideways?" I looked at her. "I'm going to apologize," I said, "and then I'm going to share my screen." She turned and looked at me for a long moment. The specific look of someone who has just understood something they hadn't asked to understand. She held her coffee with both hands and didn't push further. But I noticed she rearranged her afternoon. She had a 3 o'clock creative review that she usually attended without fail. I saw the decline notification come through on the shared calendar at 9:15. She was clearing her afternoon to watch the call. After the call, she was the first person who knocked on my office door. The call started at 2 o'clock. 12 faces on the grid. Mr. Ferris led the introduction, smooth, warm, the right amount of enthusiasm for a strategy review. He had a quality in these settings that I had spent months trying to name accurately. He performed competence in a way that made the room comfortable before the content had even started. Mr. Okafor was on the call. So was Miss Calloway, the new CMO. And a third face I had seen only once before, a man named Mr. Addo, listed in the invite as Harlow's newly appointed head of brand standards. His presence had not been flagged to us in advance. I noted that Mr. Ferris moved through the opening slides. At slide 4, the campaign concept, he began describing the price-led headline strategy with the confidence of someone explaining their own thinking. I watched the Harlow faces. Mr. Okafor's expression changed on slide 6, not dramatically. A slight tightening around the eyes, the kind of expression that precedes a question by approximately 90 seconds in my experience. Miss Calloway was unreadable. Mr. Addo was writing something. I sat with my hands in my lap and my folder open on the second screen, and I let the presentation run. I had done this work before, built it right, watched it get rebuilt into something it shouldn't be. Now I was watching it presented. The feeling in my chest was quiet and specific, and I pressed it down and kept my face completely neutral. Mr. Okafor spoke at slide 11. "I want to pause here," he said. His voice was even, not aggressive. The voice of someone who has been doing this long enough to know that tone controls outcomes in these situations. "The price-led structure. Can you help me understand the thinking? Because our brief was fairly specific about the hierarchy." Mr. Ferris leaned forward slightly. "Great question. And I hear you, the brief was clear on sustainability leading. What we found as we developed the concept was that there's a stronger commercial opportunity in leading with the value message right now given the current retail environment. The sustainability narrative actually amplifies better as a supporting layer." A pause. Who made that determination? Miss Calloway asked. Her voice was precise. She was the new CMO. She had not been present when the brief was built. She did not have the relationship history. She was asking a very clean question. Mr. Ferris said, "This was a team discussion, though. I'll be honest with you. There was some misinterpretation of the brief's flexibility on this point on our side." He paused for exactly the right amount of time. "Cleo, I think it's fair to say that when the first draft came to me, the original read of the brief was a bit more literal than the situation called for." 8 faces looked at me. The room held its breath. I waited 4 seconds. "I apologize for any confusion this has caused," I said. And then, "Would you mind if I shared my screen? I have the project documentation here, and I think it'll help clarify the timeline for everyone." I didn't wait for objection. I shared my screen before anyone had time to redirect. The first document appeared, the original Harlow brief, page 7, highlighted in yellow. The exact language specifying sustainability as the primary campaign lead. Price messaging described explicitly as a secondary supporting narrative. "This is page 7 of the brief we received 6 weeks ago," I said. My voice was completely even. "The highlighted section is the hierarchy guidance we were given." I moved to the second document. "This is my original campaign draft, submitted to Mr. Ferris on the 21st at 4:47 p.m. I'll scroll to the concept section. You can see the sustainability-led structure built to the brief's specifications." I scrolled and nobody spoke. I moved to the third document. "This is the revised version Mr. Ferris sent to the team on Tuesday morning after the weekend review. The timestamp is here in the top corner." I zoomed in gently on the timestamp. I'll scroll to the same section. The price-led headline structure appeared on screen. The room was very still. I moved to the fourth document. "This is the message I sent Mr. Ferris on Tuesday morning when I received the revision." 3 sentences. The 3 discrepancies I had flagged. The attachment confirming the brief. The offer to discuss before the client call. Then the 5th document. And this is his response. "Trust the relationship. See how the conversation develops." I looked up from my screen. "I wanted to make sure everyone has the full context," I said. "I'm happy to answer any questions about the original strategy or the brief interpretation." The silence lasted 6 seconds. I counted them the way I had counted. The 4 seconds before my apology deliberately as a measure, the way you count your breathing when something is happening that you need to stay calm inside of. Mr. Okafor spoke first. "Cleo?" His voice was different from earlier, warmer. Something in it had loosened. "I appreciate you walking us through that." Miss Calloway had been writing. She stopped writing. Mr. Addo, the head of brand standards, who had been quiet the entire call, unmuted. "I want to clarify something," he said. "The brief we issued was the result of 6 months of internal brand alignment work. The 3 requirements Cleo just highlighted, sustainability lead, price as secondary, micro-influencer, only those were not flexible parameters. They were firm directives based on decisions made at board level." He paused. "The strategy we were just presented with contradicts all 3 of them." He looked directly at Mr. Ferris. "I'd like to understand," Mr. Addo said, "who authorized the deviation from the brief and on what basis?" Mr. Ferris's face on the grid had the look of a man who had prepared for one kind of call and found himself in a completely different one. He said, "There was some informal alignment." "With whom?" Miss Calloway said. A pause. "I had a preliminary conversation with—" "Was that conversation documented?" Mr. Addo asked. Another pause. The grid was completely still. 12 faces, nobody moving. The hardest part came before any of this happened. It was the previous evening, not Tuesday, but the Monday before. before I'd even received his revised deck. I had been on the phone with my older sister, Abina, for almost an hour. She worked in procurement at a large corporation and had navigated enough internal politics to understand the terrain I was describing. I told her about Mr. Ferris, about the way he had inserted himself into the account, about the emails I had started saving, the way he reframed conversations he hadn't been part of. Abina was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure you're not overthinking it?" she said. "New senior leadership always recalibrates the client relationship. That's normal." "It's more than recalibration," I said. "Maybe," she said. "But Cleo, you've built something real with Harlow. 3 years. That relationship is yours. No one can take that with a few emails." "What if they don't see it that way?" "Then you show them," she said. "But you need something to show. You can't fight a feeling." I had thought about that after we hung up. She was right. A feeling wasn't enough. Frustration wasn't enough. 2.5 years of careful, invisible work was not enough on its own unless there was something to point to. And then his revision arrived on Tuesday morning. And I realized I had been building something to point to for 3 weeks without fully understanding that was what I was doing. Mr. Ferris recovered. He had been in enough rooms to know how to recover, which made it more impressive when he couldn't. He said, "What I can tell you is that the thinking behind these changes was strategic and considered. The price-led approach reflects current retail market data and what I believe gives Harlow the strongest commercial position." "With respect," Mr. Addo said, "that's a rationale for a decision that contradicts a brief. It's not an explanation of the process by which the brief was changed without client notification." The grid was still. Mr. Ferris opened his mouth once and closed it. He had no next sentence that would help him. Mr. Okafor's voice came in measured and final the way a door closes. "Marcus, we've worked with this agency for 3 years. The last 2 of those years, Cleo has been our day-to-day contact, and she has been exceptional at understanding our brand. What I just watched on my screen was a documented trail that shows the brief was followed accurately by the person who built the work, and that the deviation happened at a different level and without client consultation." He paused. "I'm not interested in a conversation about strategy rationale right now. I'm interested in understanding how we reset." He was not looking at Mr. Ferris. He was looking at me. "Cleo, can you have the original strategy, the sustainability-led version, ready for a review call by Friday?" "I can have it ready by Thursday," I said. He smiled. "First time on the call." "Thursday is perfect," he said. After the call ended, nobody on my agency's side said anything for a long moment. I could see Premi's small square on the grid. She was looking directly at her camera. Then the grid dissolved and we were all in our separate rooms again. Mr. Ferris appeared in my doorway at 3:47. I was at my desk. The call had ended at 3:18. I had spent the 29 minutes in between sending a follow-up note to Mr. Oke for confirming Thursday's session and making a quiet list of everything I needed to prepare. He didn't knock. He stood in the frame and did not come in. His expression had the quality of a man who was deciding in real time whether anger or reasonableness was going to serve him better. I watched him choose. "That was not the appropriate way to handle that," he said. I looked at him. "You undermined my position in front of a key client," he said. "I shared the project documentation when the timeline was being characterized inaccurately," I said. "You made a judgment call in the middle of a client call without consulting me." "The call was still active when I shared my screen," I said. "I asked if it was okay before I did it. Nobody objected." He said nothing for a moment. "Cleo, we need to talk about what's appropriate in those settings." "I agree," I said. "I'd like that conversation to happen with HR present." He looked at me. "I have documentation of the full project timeline," I said. including every version of the strategy, every message exchanged, and the original brief. I'm happy to walk through all of it in a structured setting. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer. Then he turned and walked away. I saved the timestamp and a brief note in my running log. 3:47 p.m. He had come to my office after the call. That was important. Premi knocked at 4:15. She came in without waiting, sat down across from my desk, and looked at me with an expression I could not immediately read. "I watched the whole call," she said. "I know," I said. "You were on the grid." "I've been here 4 years," she said. "I have never seen anyone do what you just did." I waited. "The account manager before you, she left because of something similar. Not identical, but the same shape. She flagged something that went wrong on a client call. It was handled internally. She was out 6 months later." Premi folded her hands. She didn't have documentation. She had a feeling and a very good memory, and neither of those held up. "You had it all on your screen," Premi said, "in sequence. I've been in 100 client calls. I have never seen anyone open a folder like that. Never seen it land like that." She paused. "Where did you learn to do that?" I thought about it. "I didn't learn it," I said. "I just kept everything. Every email, every version, every message. I kept it the way you keep things when you have a feeling something is going to matter and you don't know yet when." She was quiet for a moment. "Okafor is going to go to the top of your agency about this," she said. "I know him. He's methodical. He's been watching this account for 3 years and he saw exactly what happened today." She stood up. "I'm going to write down what I witnessed on that call," she said, "formally, tonight, while it's clear." She left. I sat with my hands flat on the desk and thought about the quiet, specific steadiness of being prepared. I called my employment attorney that evening. Her name was Miss Farrow. I had her number from a conversation 6 weeks earlier, when I had described the situation in broad terms, and she had told me to start keeping records. I had. She had not heard from me since. I walked her through the call, the screen share, the documentation sequence, his appearance in my doorway at 3:47, the exact language he had used. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "He came to your office after the call and told you that sharing accurate project documentation in front of a client was inappropriate conduct?" "Yes," I said. "And you told him you'd like that conversation to happen with HR present?" "Good." A pause. "Cleo, what you described on that client call, a manager publicly misattributing a strategic decision to a junior employee in front of the client, in a way that was demonstrably inaccurate, based on documented evidence that has implications beyond a difficult workplace situation, particularly if any consequences follow from today's call." She told me to document Mr. Ferris's doorway visit in writing tonight, to send myself a time-stamped email summarizing the call while it was fresh, to keep every record current. "And if he takes any adverse action against you in the next 30 days, she said, "call me before you respond to anything." I thanked her and hung up. Then I opened a new document and started writing. 2 things happened the following morning that I had not anticipated. The first, Mr. Okafor sent an email to our CEO, Mr. Baxter, at 7:52 a.m. I know this because Mr. Baxter forwarded it to me at 8:19 with a one-line note, "Can we talk at 9?" I read Mr. Okafor's email standing at my kitchen counter with my coffee going cold. It's 5 paragraphs, measured and precise in the way Mr. Okafor always was. It described the call. It described the moment the screen was shared. It said, "What Cleo presented made clear that the campaign delivered to us was not the work she had built or recommended. We have full confidence in Cleo's understanding of our brand and her integrity in this account relationship. We do not currently have the same confidence in the direction of the broader client services leadership." He had copied 3 people at Harlow. including Miss Calloway and Mr. Addo. The second thing, Premi had sent her written account of the call to HR at 9:47 p.m. the previous evening. I found out when HR contacted me at 8:43 to say they had received a third-party account of Wednesday's client call and were initiating a review. I had not asked Premi to send it. She had done it on her own at night because she said she wanted to while it was clear. I sat with that for a moment. Then I got in the car and drove to the office. The 9 o'clock call with Mr. Baxter lasted 22 minutes. He led with Mr. Okafor's email. He read one paragraph aloud, the one about confidence, and then he was quiet. "Walk me through what happened on that call," he said. I walked him through it. Precise, sequential, from the brief to the revision to my flag to his response to the call to the screen share. I had my notes in front of me, but I barely needed them. He listened without interrupting, the way people listen when they're deciding something rather than just registering information. When I finished, he said, "Do you have all of this documented?" "Yes," I said. He asked me to send it to him directly. I sent it while we were still on the call. He opened it and read in silence for a few minutes. "Cleo," he said, "I want to be honest with you. What you're describing and what the documentation appears to support is a significant problem. Not just for this account relationship, for how this agency operates at the intersection of senior leadership and client-facing work." He was quiet for a moment after that. "I've been in this business for 22 years, he said. "The reason client relationships break is almost never the work. It's the gap between the work and how it gets represented. What Mr. Okafor's email describes an account manager who protected the brief accurately, whose work was then altered without client notification, and the alteration attributed back to her. That gap has no good outcome if it goes unaddressed." He told me the HR review would begin that day. He asked me to hold the specifics for that process. He would be in touch by end of week. Then he said, "The Harlow call on Thursday. I'd like you to run it. Alone." That was the moment I understood exactly where this was going. The Thursday call with Harlow lasted 90 minutes. I had rebuilt the strategy from the original brief, sustainability-led, price as supporting narrative, micro-influencer architecture with 3 tiers of content partnership, every slide traceable to a specific line from their brief, footnoted at the bottom. I ran it alone. No Mr. Ferris, no other senior leadership, just me, my screen, and 8 Harlow faces I had been working with for 2.5 years. Mr. Okafor said at the end, "This is exactly what we asked for." Miss Calloway said, "I want to understand the thinking behind the micro-influencer architecture. Walk me through the reasoning." I walked her through 30 minutes of methodology, the data behind the tier selection, the brand safety logic, the content model for each tier. She asked 3 follow-up questions. I answered all 3 in full. Mr. Addo said very little during the presentation. At the end, he unmuted and said, "The brief alignment here is precise. This is the work we commissioned." After the call ended, I sat alone in my office for a few minutes. I thought about 2 things simultaneously. The first was the Tuesday night when I had organized my screen into reading order. The brief, my draft, his revision, his message, 5 documents in sequence. Not because I knew exactly how or when I would use them, but because I had learned somewhere in 2.5 years of client services that the difference between a recoverable situation and a terminal one is almost always whether you can show you're working. The second was Abena's voice. "You can't fight a feeling." She had been right. The feeling, the gradual, low-grade alarm I had been carrying for months, was not enough on its own. It was real, but it was mine. The folder was different. The folder belonged to anyone who opened it. I had built the insurance policy. The Thursday call was the payout. And sitting in my office afterward, I felt something I had not felt in months in connection with this work. I felt like myself. HR ran the review over 2 weeks. I gave one formal session, lasting 90 minutes. I walked the investigator, a woman named Miss Owuzu from an external firm, through every document in sequence. She asked questions I had already anticipated about the nature of the brief, the revision process, the call itself, Mr. Ferris's doorway visit. She also asked me about the longer pattern, whether Wednesday was a single incident or part of something I had been observing over time. I was precise. I said I could speak specifically to the 6 weeks of this project. Beyond that, I could describe observations over a longer period, but I wanted to be clear about what was documented versus what was inferred. She appreciated that distinction. She said so. Premi gave a statement the same week. I did not know what it contained. I found out later that it covered not just Wednesday's call but 3 prior incidents over 4 months where she had observed similar patterns of attribution client communications where Premi's read was that the account manager's work was being presented upward in ways that compressed or removed attribution. A junior analyst named Kwasi had also submitted something, unprompted. He had attended one external presentation in February where he had watched an entire analysis. He had helped me build, described as a team output led by senior leadership. He was 23 years old and had been with the agency 8 months, and he had written 4 careful paragraphs about what he observed. I did not know about Kwasi's statement until the review was complete. When I found out, I sat with it for a long time. Mr. Ferris came to my desk on a Tuesday morning, 10 days after the Wednesday call. He sat down across from me. He had not done that before. Not in my office, not as a conversation between 2 people rather than a manager addressing a report. I noticed that. He looked different. Not smaller exactly, more compressed, the way people look when they have been carrying weight in a space that wasn't designed to hold it. I'd been asked to step back from the head of client services role while the review runs, he said. Simple, no frame around it. I said nothing. I want to say something, he said. He looked at the desk rather than at me. I have been in this industry for 18 years. I have managed accounts. I've led teams. And I've always told myself that how things are presented upward is a leadership function, that distilling team output into client communication is what managers are paid to do. He stopped. I understand now that there's a version of that which is legitimate and a version of that which is not. And I crossed into the wrong version in ways that I don't think I was honest with myself about while it was happening. He looked up. I'm sorry, he said. That call, the revision, the 2.5 years of... He stopped again. The way I represented your work. I'm sorry. I looked at him for a moment. I hear you, I said. He nodded. He stood. He walked out of my office. I sat with the apology for a long time afterward. It was real, I believed that. It was also very late, and those 2 things were both true at the same time, and I didn't know how to resolve them into a single feeling. The formal outcomes were delivered in a meeting with Mr. Baxter and the head of people, Ms. Gankosi, on a Friday afternoon. Mr. Ferris had resigned from the head of client services role, effective the end of the month. The agency had accepted the resignation without contest. The agency issued a formal acknowledgement that the campaign strategy submitted to Harlow on Tuesday of the week prior to the call had contradicted the client brief in 3 material ways, and that the original strategy built by me had been accurate to the brief specifications. This acknowledgement went in writing to Harlow's leadership team, including Mr. Okafor, Ms. Calloway, and Mr. Addo. There was a financial element reflecting the period of impact on my professional standing, negotiated with the help of Ms. Farrow. There were 2 structural changes. First, account managers were restored as primary client contacts, with senior leadership playing a support and escalation role rather than a primary communication function. Second, campaign strategy submissions would require a named attribution field in the project management platform, identifying the lead developer before any external communication. The second change had come from me. I had requested it specifically during the HR review. Not out of anger, out of logic. If the attribution field existed in the platform, nobody could present work externally without the developer's name being attached to it. It was the structural version of keeping records, built into the system rather than dependent on one person remembering to do it. Mr. Baxter looked at me before I left. "Harlow renewed yesterday," he said. "Higher retainer, 3-year term. They specified in the contract that you remain the lead account manager." I hadn't known that. I sat with it for a moment, not triumphantly, but with a specific, quiet recognition. This was the account I had built from a difficult relationship into something strong. 3 years of patient, precise work that had survived being nearly dismantled in a single Tuesday morning document revision. It had survived because I kept the original. I thanked him and walked out. Mr. Okafor called me directly 2 weeks after the review closed. Not through the agency system. He had my mobile number from a call we had done during a campaign crisis 18 months earlier when the agency's systems went down and we managed client communication through personal phones for 6 hours. He asked if I had a few minutes. I had a few minutes. "I want to tell you something," he said. "We've worked with a lot of agencies. Long relationships, short ones, good ones, and ones that went sideways. And in my experience, what happens when things go wrong on a call almost always tells you more about an agency than what happens when things go right." He paused. "What you did on Wednesday, not the screen share but the preparation that made the screen share possible. That is the rarest thing in a client relationship. You had protected the brief. You had documented the deviation. You had organized the evidence so that the truth could be visible in under 3 minutes to a room full of people who didn't have any context." Another pause. Most people in that situation either say nothing or say something they can't prove. "You proved it," he said, "with your screen." I thanked him. After we hung up, I stayed at my kitchen table for a while with the phone face up in front of me. It was a Wednesday evening, exactly 2 weeks since the call. I thought about what he'd said, the preparation that made the screen share possible. That was the thing nobody saw. The folder, the reading order, the insurance policy built across 6 weeks without knowing precisely when or whether it would ever be used. 6 weeks after the review closed, the agency formally created a head of client services role for the second time. The job description had been built in consultation with the Harlow team, the agency's creative directors, and for the first time in this kind of appointment, the lead account managers. The role required 15+ years of client services experience, deep familiarity with brand strategy development, and a demonstrated record of account management rather than pure commercial relationship skills. I was not going to apply for it. I was going to apply for something else. 3 days before the posting went live, Mr. Baxter had called me in and shown me a draft of a new role, Senior Account Director, a position that had not existed at the agency before. It would sit above the account manager level, below head of client services, with direct oversight of the Harlow account and 2 others, a seat at the senior client strategy table, and a compensation structure that reflected what I had actually been doing for the past 18 months. He said, "This role was built around what you demonstrated, not just on the Wednesday call, over 2.5 years. I asked for a day to think about it. I called Abina that evening. "You showed them," she said, "like I told you." "You told me I couldn't fight a feeling," I said. "Right," she said. "You needed something to show. You had something to show." "I had a folder called Call Prep," I said. She laughed. I accepted the role the following morning. I think about Wednesday sometimes. Not the screen share the moment before it. The 4 seconds between Mr. Ferris saying my name in front of 8 Harlow faces and the moment I said, "I apologize." 4 seconds is not a long time. In a meeting or a conversation, it barely registers. But in a client call with 12 people on a grid and something significant in the air, 4 seconds is enough time to make a decision that determines what kind of person you're going to be when things get hard. I could have stayed quiet. That would have been the path of least resistance. Let the call end. Let the confusion land. Address it internally. Hope that someone somewhere eventually noticed what actually happened. That is the path most people take. It is the path D took, the account manager before me. It is the path that leaves a feeling you cannot prove, and a record that belongs to someone else. I could have spoken up immediately, interrupted, corrected, defended myself out loud in real time. That would have been satisfying for about 11 seconds and then damaging for a long time after. What I did instead was apologize. And then ask if I could share my screen. That sequence, the apology first, the evidence second, is the thing I keep coming back to. Because the apology wasn't false. I was genuinely sorry for the confusion. The confusion was real, regardless of who caused it. The apology acknowledged what was happening in the room without accepting responsibility for something I hadn't done. And then the screen removed any ambiguity about what had actually happened. I didn't fight the feeling. I showed the folder. Because the truth doesn't need a voice. It needs a screen. You can have the receipts for years and they mean nothing until the right moment, and when that moment comes, the only thing that matters is whether you kept them. What's sitting in your folder right now that the room